Okay, ladies and gentlemen, Chapter 6, Supply, Demand, and Government Policies. These are the questions we're going to look to address. What are price ceilings and price floors? What are some examples of each? How do price ceilings and price floors affect market outcomes? How do taxes affect market outcomes? And how do the effects depend on whether the tax is imposed on buyers or sellers? And then finally, what is the incidence of a tax and what determines that incidence? Here we go. The first new vocab term that we're introduced to is price controls. And price controls is a general term. They are either price ceilings or price floors. They are interventions by your government that helps shape price in a market. So the first type of price control is a price ceiling. And what it is a legal maximum for a particular good or service. So an example would be a government stepping in and saying rent can go no higher than. If you charge a rent exceeding $500, you are violating the law. That's an example of a price ceiling. A price floor would be the exact opposite. It would be a legal minimum. And as you can imagine, price floors are put in place to protect, oftentimes, sellers. Maybe it's the seller of agricultural goods, where the market outcome would actually be a price that they could not survive on. So the government tries to step in and support producers and say that they cannot sell, or the price cannot drop below this floor. And obviously we can think about, in terms of those who sell their services, laborers, paying them a minimum wage is an example of a price floor. That's not the only way the government can intervene in the market and determine outcomes, or shape outcomes. The government can also impose taxes, so they can make buyers or sellers pay a specific amount on each unit that is bought and sold. What we're going to do is we're going to use supply and demand, our trusty friend, that model, to determine how these government interventions actually affect the equilibrium price and the equilibrium quantity. So our first example is going to be a price floor example. Our market is for apartments. Let's put it in place, let's say this is New York City. New York City, the supply of apartments is really tight, and there's a lot of people who are looking to live there. So some might say that landlords have undue leverage that they can exert on the consumers, the people who are looking for apartments. So we might step in and impose a price ceiling and say rent can go no higher than this particular amount. Well, we have supply and demand, and we have what is equilibrium price and quantity with no government intervention. But now we impose a price control of $1,000. Our question is, does this affect the market outcome? And hopefully we're able to say that no, this does not. Take a look at how many units would be supplied at $1,000. Okay? And then take a look at how many units would be demanded at $1,000. If we say that it can go no higher than $1,000, if you sell apartments for more than $1,000, it is illegal. We would step in and say that it's going to have no effect on market outcomes. Because when people are charging $1,000 for those units, we have a surplus of goods. And we have all these apartments that are sitting unoccupied. The only way that producers would be able to get rid of those is to reduce the price. So naturally, price would come down to the equilibrium of $800. So we would describe a price ceiling, a government intervention of this kind, as non-binding or ineffective. It does not affect the market outcome. But that's not the only way that we can step in and set a price ceiling. What if we set it below the equilibrium price? Well, then it is going to have an effect, because you've attracted a lot of consumers at that lower price, when it is illegal to sell for above $500. But there's very few people who are willing to rent those apartments at that price. Now we have not a surplus, but a shortage. Now we have an altered market outcome. We see that goods are, in this instance, a service is not going to be rendered at $800 like it would. It is illegal to rent for $800. Instead, it will be $500, and we will have a lot of people searching, but very few people finding those now cheaper apartments. So the price ceiling that is set below equilibrium is called a binding constraint. It is a binding price ceiling or an effective price ceiling. Okay? Now, what we need to understand is in the long run, our elasticities of supply and demand are different. When we give consumers and producers more time, they're able to adjust their decisions. Therefore, the supply curve is going to be flatter, as will the demand curve. And flatter, we remember, translates into higher elasticity. And if we have more elastic curves and the government intervenes in the exact same way, we look at the shortage now even becoming greater. So the idea is the longer we impose this price ceiling that artificially reduces the price, we're going to find that shortage grow and grow. Okay? The shortage is larger. Now, here is some of the problems with those shortages that we're going to see as a result of effective price ceilings. One of the problems is that sellers must now ration goods amongst the buyers. And normally, they don't have to do this. Because normally, we would say that price is going to allocate those goods. Whoever wants to pay the highest price is going to get those apartments. All those who were willing to pay $800 for an apartment got one in the past with no government intervention. But now we have to have new rationing mechanisms. We're going to find that we have a ton of consumers looking for the exact same thing. Therefore, the time that they spend in line or in search of that apartment is going to grow. That's all waste. And now with all these people looking for apartments and very tight supply, those people who are renting those apartments are now going to discriminate on whatever biases they have and cherry pick those who actually get them. And we say that's unfair and unjust. So we've created an opportunity to discriminate when we've actually artificially kept that price low. So we say those are inefficient because those who value the goods most highly, in terms of they would be willing to pay the most, don't necessarily actually get the goods. In contrast, when prices are not controlled, the rationing mechanism is efficient because those who get the good are those who are willing to pay the most. Now, we go to a different situation. We go to a different market where there's a price determined, in this instance we call it a wage, and there's a quantity determined, the amount of labor that's going to be employed. So if we look at the market for unskilled labor, we might say that the market outcome, where supply meets demand, maybe it's unjust, it's unfair, you can't live on $6 an hour. So the government wants to step in and support, in this instance, those who are selling a product or service. They say that's too low. We need to increase this wage. Well, what if they step in and they set a price floor of $5? If they say that's the floor and it can go no lower, well, you have, all right, quantity demanded and quantity supplied. Quantity supplied is how many people want to work at that price. This is how many people that employers want to hire. You would have, in this instance, a shortage. If you had a $5 wage, you would have all these people who are looking for workers, but nobody willing to work. This would alleviate itself naturally. If you had such a shortage, the price would naturally rise to $6. So if we said it can go no lower than 5, well, who cares? It's not going to go to 5 because the market outcome will be 6. That price floor we would describe as non-binding or ineffective. Okay. But what if we set a different price floor? If we set the minimum wage above equilibrium, now we are going to change things. Just take a look at how many people are willing to supply their labor at this new wage. And take a look at how many people want to be hired, or how many workers firms want to hire. You would see that we have, in this instance, a surplus of workers. Too many. Got a lot of people searching for jobs and very few vacancies. It's illegal to sell yourself for anything less than $7.25. We are going to have a surplus. And in this instance, we see the government's intervention is having an effect. The wage is increased and the number of employees goes down. You used to have Q1. Now you have QD. Fewer people find jobs, but those who do are paid a higher wage. So this is kind of a catch-22. You did support some workers who still retained their jobs, but you eliminated some of these jobs. The difference between Q1 and 400. Okay? This is a binding constraint. The wage causes a surplus or unemployment. So minimum wage laws do not affect highly skilled workers. Usually highly skilled workers are paid at equilibrium. They do affect, though, teen workers, and what we find is, they've done studies, a 10% increase in the minimum wage raises teen unemployment by 1 to 3%. So when you're thinking about what side would you fall down on with respect to a minimum wage event or minimum wage increase, just remember that we need to figure out what would a theoretical equilibrium wage be, and what type of wage would be reasonable, and what trade-offs are we willing to accept. Are we willing to accept higher pay for those who still retain jobs with a little higher unemployment? What would we be willing to accept? So here we have some examples. We'll draw this in and then we'll see what outcomes we get. Determine the effects of a $90 price ceiling. Then we're going to determine the effects of a $90 price floor. And finally, a $120 price floor. So let's first look at a $90 price ceiling. What we would do is we would come to $90 and we would say, okay, this is our price ceiling. The price can rise no higher than $90. Well, in such a case, this would be quantity demanded. This would be quantity supplied. If demand exceeds supply, you would say you have a shortage. And if the ceiling is set below the equilibrium price, you would say it's effective. So how many units are going to be sold? It says the market for hotel rooms. Well, we're going to have 90, and I don't know if they have units on it, so it's going to be 90 units are going to be sold. However, you're going to have a lot of people who are looking for them, 120. So people are going to be wasting their time trying to find a vacancy here because there are too many customers searching for too few hotel rooms. So that was the analysis there. Now what if that $90 was not a price ceiling, but rather a price floor? So again, we'd be doing the same thing. We'd just be labeling differently. What if that was the price floor? The government stepped in and said, you can't secure a hotel room for anything less than $90. We want to support those who are providing those hotel rooms. Well, if that's the case, again, you would have this be the quantity demanded, this be the quantity supplied. That is not going to persist. If you have that shortage, the price will rise until quantity supplied is exactly equal to quantity demanded, and it will be $100. Without government intervention, it would have been $100. With government intervention of a price floor of $90, it's still $100. So this one is non-binding or not effective. But what if instead of that being our price floor, what if we set a price floor above the equilibrium? What if we said it was $120? Okay, you can't find legally a hotel room for less than $120. Well, that means our quantity supplied is going to go up. That's how producers respond. Higher prices mean higher willingness to supply. Quantity demand goes down. So now what we have is a serious surplus. We have a lot of people who are willing to open up their hotel rooms. It's 120. But we only have a few individuals who are looking for hotel rooms at that price. 60. You have a surplus equal to 60 units. 120 minus 60. And obviously the government has intervened and achieved a different price. It was 100, now it's up to 120. So let's check our work. We have $90 as our price ceiling. We have a shortage. We're going to see impact on this. Okay? If we have a price floor, it is going to be ineffective. It's not binding. if we have 120, buyers demand 60 rooms, sellers supply 120, we have a significant surplus. So if we're evaluating price controls, we say, we want to look back at one of our 10 principles that markets usually are a good way to organize economic activity. It's a good way to allocate goods and services, allow markets and their forces of supply and demand to determine price and quantity. Prices are the signals that guide and allocate society's resources. This allocation is altered when policymakers restrict prices. So we can step in and change market outcomes, but it doesn't necessarily mean that we did so in an efficient manner. Price controls are often intended to help the poor, but they often hurt more than they help. Obviously, if we're supporting those who are working at minimum wage, what we do is for those who continue to retain those jobs, we help them out. But for those who lost their jobs, we've now just harmed them. So we often find that our intentions don't necessarily match the outcomes. Okay? And I'm going to stop right there, and I'm going to say that's my price control video. If you can now go and fill out a response form for the price control video, I would be much appreciative.